Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to what's hopefully the last webinar in the cutover from legacy Landonline to the new Landonline. Awesome. That looks like the participant numbers have stabilized. So I'll kick things off now. So welcome again, everyone. I'm Nick Stillwell, Consulting Surveyor on the Modernising Landonline program. And today we've also got Jeremy Gutzel. He's one of the cadastral surveyors in the property rights team at Linds. And we'll also have Lyndon Telfer, the survey product manager, jumping on at the end to help answer questions at the end of the webinar. So we'll jump into the presentation now. Next slide, please, Ben. Cool. So here's what we're running through today. Already been through an introduction. We will have a bit of a timeline of what has happened with PlanGen and what's expected to happen over the next couple of months. We have a bit of a section in the presentation where we'll talk through things that are really important for you to know about plan generation, and then we'll jump into the substantive part of the session, which will be the demo. We'll talk a little bit about a couple of features we haven't finished yet, which aren't too far away. That's fast followers. Nearly at the end of the session, we'll have the Q&A section. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation using the Q&A button, which should be somewhere in the top panel of your Teams interface. That's where we will be answering questions, but they will be answered at the end. So don't sit there checking the whole way through the meeting to see if your question's been answered. And then once we've wrapped up the question and answers, we'll jump into the what's next, which kind of, just talks about the actual go live process and when you'll get access. Is that everything I need to cover off? I believe it is. Cool, let's jump to the timeline. Oh, I've already mentioned that point. Cool, so in terms of new plan generation, it's been in development for just well over a year. I can't remember the exact start date, but the first release to external customers, the pilot group, was on the 3rd of February. And so we've had people using plan generation for months now. And that's been really helpful to, like it has been with all the apps we've built so far, to get early feedback and prioritize the most important features and help to make sure the app's in good shape ahead of open release and reduce the chance of kind of unintended or undiscovered issues making it out into the broader release. So big thanks to the pilot group who have shared lots of feedback during that window. So here we are in July, and so at some stage later today, the plan generation new application will be accessible to all survey users of New Landonline. And yeah, we're working towards a end of legacy switch off date for legacy Landonline. So that'll be PlanGen search, but really just all of legacy Landonline will, because this is the kind of last remaining feature in the cutover from legacy to new. So yeah, we've got a little bit of a window there to get on over to the new PlanGen and give you a chance to get used to it before that cutoff date. Let's move on to some of the important things to know. So I guess the main one is that if you started drafting a plan in legacy, you will be able to open it in New Landonline and complete drafting. So hopefully that's a sigh of relief if you're sitting there worrying about that. Another really important thing with new plan generation is not to open it and use it while you have Capture open in another browser window. So another user can't get into it, but if you're logged in as the same person, you could theoretically access both Capture and PlanGen from the same different browser tabs. Do not do this. You're warned about it in the application as well. But yeah, it can create data loss for you if you try to do that. So just don't. And I guess as part of that, we're kind of saying don't bookmark or save URLs to access PlanGen, because it just increases that chance of trying to open Capture and PlanGen at the same time, or even two different versions of PlanGen at the same time, which is something we really don't want to happen. So I guess those are three really important points to remember if you're as you're getting used to using the new plan generation app. Next slide, please, Ben. So in terms of transitioning to new plan generation, and hopefully none of this is news to anyone because this is all in the email that's already gone out. But we plan to remove access to legacy, plan gen, and search on the 30th of September. After that date, all work must be completed in new Landonline or new plan generation. So from today, or whenever it's released later today, we recommend that all new plans that you start drafting start in Landonline. And we also recommend that once you've started working on something in new Landonline and you've clicked save for the first time, don't jump back into legacy, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So once you've started in the new app and you've hit save, let's not go back to legacy. Save yourself the pain. As part of, I guess, those first 2 points, or those first 3 points I made, it's important that, if you started in legacy and your survey won't be approved by the 30th of September, move to the new system now. If your survey will be approved before the 30th of September, you can choose to finish in legacy or switch to new. My personal experience, having used this a fair bit, is I would personally just make the switch now. But you can always, when you're swapping from legacy to new, you can jump in, open it up in the new app, have a look at it, check over it visually, and then if you don't click save, you're kind of free to still revert to legacy if you really want to. But yeah, I think you'll find if you look over the plans, you'll be pretty satisfied with them, and hopefully you just want to carry on in the new system. So, next slide, please, Ben. Cool. So this is, I guess, one of the key changes that has happened is there are some new fonts that are used in the new system, and that's because there's actually a significant expense in using those old fonts. So these new fonts are open source. We've tried to get the best match we can for look and size. However, there are some minor differences. So these two screenshots are overlays showing, I guess, the mismatch between a plan prepared in legacy and open a new Landonline. And I was sure I would remember the color, but maybe I think the red one is legacy Landonline and the blue is new Landonline, and where it's black, they match perfectly. So you can see our bearing and distance labels match very well. Most of the marked labels match really well. The appellation labels have a little bit of a shift at the top, and they're a bit smaller, and the road labels are also a little bit smaller. So I guess because of these visual differences, we're just kind of encouraging you to visually inspect all plan sheets prior to lodgement when you jump over into the new app, which I hope is something people are doing anyway, because I know things can move from time to time. Okay, next slide. Demo. So this is the part where I have to share my screen. Bear with me for a second. Excellent. Jeremy, have you got my screen there now?
Yep, can see it nice and clear, Nick.
Cool. Okay, so as promised, the demo will form the substantive part of the presentation. So I'll rip into that now. I'll be covering off through to define diagrams being finished, and then I'll hand over to Jeremy and he'll do layout plan sheets, mostly just so I don't run out of voice. Hopefully it'll be nice to break it up for you too. So I guess the first thing is, once plan generation is released for you, when you open a survey, you'll get the choice of going into survey capture or into plan generation. If you know you've started plan generation and you want to do plan generation now, it's best to go straight through to plan generation. The reason for that is when you open survey capture, it runs regenerate, and when it's run regenerate, then it has to regenerate the plan when you open the plan, which takes longer, particularly if you're working on a large data set. So that can save you, I guess, minutes of sitting there waiting on those larger plans. So yeah, if you do want to go straight to plan generation, I'd encourage you to do that. However, in this demo, I'm going to be focusing around, I've just finished my work in capture and I'm moving into plan generation. So I'm going to start in capture today, and I better open the right survey. Don't edit until demo. There we go. So open survey capture. Oh, so just missing where I'm up to on my list, sorry. Oh, yeah. So the first step before jumping over to plan generation is that we do encourage you to jump in and check the pre-validation report. So I'm just going to jump in and run it. And the main thing to check for is the adjustments. And the reason for this is we actually get quite a few phone calls to the call center of people having issues with things going awry in plan gen, either sheets not showing or things kind of look all jumbled. And the vast majority of the time that this happens, there is a high standard error of unit weight on either the minimally constrained or the fully constrained adjustment. So we'll just encourage you to jump in and check that that standard error unit weight's nice and low on both. Yeah, if it's high on the fully constrained adjustment, then chances are there's a linking error. If it's also high on the minimally constrained adjustment, chances are you've got a bearing kind of entered backwards or something like that. So basically recommend not jumping into plan gen until you've managed to get these numbers down to something reasonably low and ruled out all capture errors, just to avoid the frustration of trying to get working in plan gen. Now, if you're in survey capture, you can navigate to plan generation using this button here, the mountain inside the picture frame kind of thing. And if you hover on it, you can see plan generation there. So I'm going to open that up now. So it pops up with this warning: you cannot perform edits in survey capture and plan generation concurrently on the same data set. Please close all browser tabs with survey capture running to prevent data loss. I'm going to dismiss that because I'm well aware of it. But yeah, just another reminder on that one. So this page here we call the landing page. I guess there's a couple of sections. Up on the top left here, you can go back to the survey capture page or to the My Work page. If you don't need to do more capture, recommend going through to My Work. It will save you time. It also releases all the locks cleanly, as does going through capture. Yeah, there's the help option there. You'll see that consistently throughout all the pages. Then we've got the 4 options here, which will be much like you would be used to from the past and legacy. So I'm going to, I'll just briefly open the help. So that opens up in a new tab. Cool. And there's a lot of really helpful information here. Info on transitioning, getting started, device requirements, defined diagrams, layout plan sheets, so on and so forth. Key differences with legacy. So yeah, and known issues is another one there as well. So yeah, would encourage you to jump in there and have a look through to just familiarize yourself with it. So the first one of these that I'm going to jump into and present first is label preferences. So under label preferences, these were all legacy features. My understanding is they're not always as well known as people might like. So first off, I'll mention the labels for new plans tab. So this is the place where you can set up your defaults for how you want your plans to, the kind of styling of text labels in your plan to be by default. So if you change them in this tab, the next time you create a new plan, it will be created with these default settings. So you can see here, I like my child diagram labels and diagram labels to be bold, and I like these ones to be 16. So I've actually changed them. I've hit save, and I have set it up. So in the future, my plans will be created with this style set. And this is another, I guess, another one, particularly if you're working on large surveys, this hidden objects visible by default. If you untick this, every time you open plan gen, that show hide button that turns the hidden layer kind of, I guess, to gray or invisible, can be toggled off by default too, by choosing that option there. So all those options are there for you for setting up defaults for new plans. In terms of this plan, I will change a couple of these. So I'll make my vector distance labels 10 and my bearing labels a 10 as well. And I will turn off hidden objects by default. That's, I guess, pretty simple. You just click in the boxes and the options are there. In terms of the fonts, I mentioned before that the fonts are slightly different. If you choose the font editing section, I'll just choose one of these. You can see we've listed what font that was. So if you're sitting there going, what on earth is Roboto? Just click on it. Roboto was Timer if you were trying to choose the font that you were looking for. Okay, so I'm going to hit save there. I think that's everything on label preferences I needed to mention. Cool, it is. The next one I'm going to jump into is define diagrams. This functionality is largely the same as Legacy Landonline. You'll see when you jump in, it's created a default system generated diagram and a default system generated survey diagram and system generated primary diagram. In terms of the layout here, basically you've got the generic help stuff is up here. So you've got known issues, a chance to provide feedback on the app, and the link to help from here. So if you want to do any of those, if you find an issue while you're working in here, that will help you with those. This is the first case where we've got that, what I'd call the app switcher. So in the top left here, you'll see it's currently saying diagrams with a drop-down option. From here, you can jump to other places. So you can go to I'm already at define diagrams. You can jump to layout plan sheets if you want. You can jump back to the landing page. That was the previous page we were on. Jump back to survey capture, or jump all the way back to my work. So if you were closing out of the survey from this point and you wanted to release the lock, that's the recommended process. Choose my work, jump back there, that'll release the lock, and then you can close out of Landonline. And then all of the tools are in this section through here. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's pretty easy once you're used to it. So I'm going to go through and create a few diagrams just to demonstrate that. Okay, so my first one I'll do is a primary diagram. So we've got two options. We've got by rectangle or by polygon. We haven't maintained the define by circle option because it was so infrequently used. You can just use a rectangle where you're using a circle, and hopefully that works. Also, if you've created them with a circle in Legacy, they will come through fine into the new app. It won't create any issues for you. I'm going to choose to define by polygon in this case. So I click the button, I start drawing a shape. I'll click out past the center line of the roads to make sure the road labels come through. And then I can double click to finish. And that will create the diagram. And I will do a survey diagram. I'll use a polygon tool here as well. Generally, I would recommend, one of the challenges with system generated diagrams is they can incorporate a lot more than you actually need. Not such a problem on a small survey, but I would definitely recommend having your diagrams hugging closer to what you actually need when you're creating them. Okay, so I have created a slightly funny shaped diagram there. That will be my diagram A. And for the purpose of demonstrating the feature, I've intentionally just left out that little bit of vector there that I wanted included in my survey. So to extend a diagram, you can use the Select Diagrams button here. Click that on. Then all the diagrams become selectable. I click the one I want. Once I have a diagram selected, these four options here become available. So I've got enlarge diagram by rectangle or polygon, or reduce diagram by rectangle or polygon. So in my case, I want to enlarge the diagram by polygon, so I'll choose that tool. I choose a point inside my diagram, I extend outside my diagram, and then make sure I finish off with my polygon inside the diagram, and that will essentially extend my diagram by that amount. The same functionality works for removing from a diagram. I won't demonstrate that now, it's the same process, but just choose a different option at the top there. I will also create a child diagram in here, just in case people aren't aware of that. I assume it's all the same or familiar if you've used Legacy, but so let's create a child diagram. So if I make a second diagram that's contained entirely within another diagram, Landonline, the functionality will go through and make it a child diagram. So you see, once it's finished creating this, it will label that one diagram AA. There's diagram A, and AA is the child of diagram A. One last thing to demo in here is the record of title lines. So if you want to pull through underlying RT lines onto your plan so you can show the extent of the underlying estate on your survey, you use this Select RT Lines tool just here where my mouse is. I'm going to turn that on. That puts the plan into a mode where you can click on underlying lines. So I'm going to hold down the control key on my mouse to pick multiple here. I'm going to click that one and that one. And then I click add RT lines. And what that will mean is that when I open up my plan and layout plan sheets, these will be drawn on there as RT lines, and I can put my underlying estate references on either side of that. Oh, there's one last tool called draw a buttle line. It is there if you need to use it. I don't have a use case to demonstrate that today. It's a bit of an extreme edge case, hopefully. So there we go. That's defined diagrams finished off. So I'm going to jump back to the landing page using the app switcher. So I've picked the app switcher. I choose landing page. Here we are again, and my last thing to do is set up my maintain diagram layers. So I'll open this up, and this is a lot like Legacy Landonline. In my case, I don't want to use the system generated diagram, so I'm just going to turn everything off. You don't have to do this, but if you do turn off the stuff you don't need here, it will make the process of saving and opening layout plan sheets faster. So I'm just going to jump through and turn each of those off. And I do need my primary diagram. I don't need that user-defined primary diagram. I'll turn everything on. Same for user-defined survey diagram. I'll turn off the stuff, the non-primary diagram too. Cool. So just reiterating, yeah, turning off the layers that you don't need in here will make it faster to open layout plan sheets and to save layout plan sheets. So definitely encourage you to make use of that on larger data sets. Another benefit of using the user-defined diagrams is if your diagrams need to extend in the future, you don't risk the kind of diagram redrawing on you in layout plan sheets. Another bit of functionality that from talking to people is possibly not as well understood as it could be is the ability to have custom settings for individual user-defined diagrams. So I won't go through and make any changes here, but if you did have a really large diagram and say you only wanted your vectors and your bearings and your distances on there rather than all the parcel appellations, you could come in here and turn off the existing parcels to save yourself the work of having to deal with them on a large sheet. It's another way you can get it to work better on a large survey for you. Excellent. I'm just double checking my notes to make sure I've covered off all my points before I pass over to Jeremy. I have. So given that I'm going to hand this over to another surveyor now, Jeremy, who's about to jump on, I'll choose to jump back to my work page from here. You can see that goes through and releases the lock. And this plan is now ready for Jeremy to pick up. You can see that the don't edit until demo option has no lock there. So handing over to Jeremy to present layout plan sheets for you now.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, appreciate that. Hello, everyone. You can see that it's still showing as locked there by Nick, so they'll release in a couple of seconds. While I'm in here, before I jump into layout plan sheets, I'm going to have a look at a couple of other options. So if you have a data set where you don't have any data spatially captured, so you don't have any marks, lines, or vectors, such as a flats plan or a unit title plan. They're often listed those type of data sets. You'll see the survey capture is available, but plan generation is not, because obviously there's no spatial data there, so it doesn't have to go into plan generation app to be able to generate those plans. So you just normally go into survey capture and click on the plan generation button, as Nick did earlier on, and it will just go ahead and generate those plans for you. Another thing to note is that if I have another data set there and I go into plan generation straight from my work page and it's not ready for plan generation, so something needs to be done before that, it will raise an error message or a warning message here in my work page, just to let me know that in this case I don't have parcels linked or some parcels linked, so therefore I'd need to go back into capture, which I could just do straight from there, go into capture, link those parcels, and then go into plan generation from there. or I can just dismiss that and carry on. So I'm going to just jump into this one here. It does say it's locked. Hopefully it has released the lock and I can just go straight in. It's not going to. Let me just refresh that. You'll notice I often have my notices or my messages page open in a separate tab. It just means that I don't have to go back out, because often using the 9-dot button up the top there, clicking on the arrow there for my messages opens it up in a separate tab. And I don't have to keep going backwards and forwards or jumping back in and out of my data sets to get back to that page. So it's now unlocked, that one there, so I can just go straight to plan generation. And it'll take me to the landing page there. It should show me that Nick's already been in there. Again, I get that message because I'm a different user, even though Nick had that. So I can see at the top there that Nick opened it, and it was today, just before. As he mentioned before, there's also that warning message down the bottom there, just letting you know, please don't have the data capture and generation open in two tabs or in two browsers. It just means that you'll run the risk of losing your data. So I'm just going to go into layout plan sheets now. Nick's done the hard work and defined diagrams for me. And so it's loading all that information, sorting out what needs to be displayed on those in the sheets themselves. It's taking account of what labels were set up and that sort of thing. So again, it opens automatically into this window here, automatically into the title sheets. I've still got that switch mode app here, so I can do whatever, go back to the different parts of the application. But on the left-hand side there, it does remind me what plan number I'm in, and I'm now in the title sheets. So the list of the title sheet diagrams that are available there, you'll note it automatically opens a system-generated primary diagram, and because Nick turned all those layers off there, it's not showing me much data at all. I can turn that off just by clicking that one there. It removes it straight from the page. So you'll note that there's no preview icon there anymore. So just clicking in and out, you can see quite quickly which ones you want to look at and which ones you want to include. So obviously there I'm adding the diagram A, which is the one Nick wanted me to use. And you can see it's put that into there for me. Before I start getting into the graphical side of it itself, down the bottom left here, it has a little T there. It's a switch mode between title sheets and survey sheets. So again, I'm just going to select survey sheet, and you'll see the system generated Travis diagram there. But I'll switch back to the title sheets in the meantime. I can toggle that panel off. So if I want to hide that just to give me a bit more real estate, I can do that. Along the bottom here, there's still the pages. So at the moment, I've got only one page. So it's obviously page 1 of 1. And I can add extra pages using this button here if I want to. So I can add new last page, new page after this one, or a new first page. If I have multiple pages, so if I just add one there, you can see I've now got 2 of 2. And I can use those arrow keys just to go backwards and forwards between them. Often I can want to renumber the pages. I can just click on that and it'll say which one do I want to renumber this page to. Do I want to make it page 2, for example? So obviously, if I try and make it page 3, it's not or nothing. It's going to tell me that I have to enter an appropriate number. So again, if I want to make that page 2, I can, and it swaps them around. If I go back to here for page 1, there's nothing on it. I can delete that using this button here. So often with new Landonline, if you have blank pages and you compile your plans, you will get a blank page come through. So normally I'd go ahead and delete this page. Yeah, just like that. I can also delete the final page as well if I want to. So I'm going to delete that page, and now it gives me a warning there saying you don't have any pages there. Perhaps you should have some. And as I said before, if you've got like a PWSI, puzzled without survey information plan, and you don't want to have any survey sheets shown, you'd go into the survey sheets and delete all the pages and end up like this. So otherwise, if you did have a blank page, it would include that in the compiled plans. Because I'm in my title sheets, I do want to have a page. I just click that button there, add that page, and just add that diagram back onto the page again. So it's just that easy. On the right-hand side on the bottom there, we've got closed layout. So if I close layout, that's just going to take me back to the landing page. It does give me a warning if I click that, excuse me, saying that I have unsaved changes, and gives me the option there just to cancel that, to leave without saving the changes, or to save the changes and then leave. I don't want to do that at the moment. I got the preview layout button there. So again, if I hit that button, it's going to do a few checks just to make sure nothing inside any of the page boundaries, and then it's going to open up a preview in a separate tab. So it's processing that at the moment. The next, so we'll do that now. So you can see it's opened up in a separate page, separate tab, and it gives me the option there on the top right. Depending on your browser, you'll have all these options available, but I can print it. So hit the print button and select my printer that I want to print it to, or select the download button. So I can download it here, and it allows me to download and save it as a PDF. If I don't want to do that, I can just close that tab and just go back to where I was. If I've made some changes in here, the compile plans button will be grayed out. So it obviously says I must save my changes before I compile the plans. So you'd go and make those changes, save, and then you could the ability to compile plans would be available for you to use. And obviously any compiled plans will appear in your My Messages as the compiled plans to the signing surveyor and primary contact as per legacy. On the top right, I've still got those known issues, the feedback icons and the help icons. So if I was to click help here, it would take me straight through to the help for layout plan sheets. The other options next to on the top here, I've got an undo button. So undo will undo the last action. It is just to undo one last action. So if you did a whole lot of different actions, you want to undo all of them. Unfortunately, that's not available. It just undoes the last action. The delete icon there, so obviously I need to have something selected in order to delete it, so that's why it's grayed out at the moment. And I can zoom in and zoom out, or I can use the zoom to fit or zoom center just to expand it out back to where it was. I do have the option as well, if I hold down the shift key, it gives me an option to, and then the shift key and then the left mouse button and drag, it gives me a little box there. And if I let one of those go, it zooms straight in there. So it's an easy way to zoom in and zoom out to what part of the page you're wanting to work on. I have the labels, I view labels options. So again, if I turn those all off, I can turn them off here, and it leaves the diagram labels on, but they will have to stay on anyway. They always do. And one thing to note here, if you go ahead and compile plans or preview layout here, you will get this version here. So you won't have any labels on your compiled plans. So just something to note there. It is a temporary state though, so if I go out of layout plan sheets or go out of plan generation, go back to survey capture and then come back in again, those labels will be back again. So it is sort of a temporary state. It just makes it an easy way to isolate what you're wanting to look for, what labels and what you want to have displayed on the screen. I have the hide objects option there as well, so we'll show you a little bit later. But again, just as Nick said before, you can have that turned on and off in the earlier other options. We've got generic select, so I can select a label and move it. I can select a line, and I can select a coordinate as well. Might be a bit small there, but we'll show that in more detail. But unfortunately, at the moment, I don't have the option to select multiple items, so I can only select one of each thing. So I want to select multiple labels. Normally, I'd hold down the control key to be able to select multiple ones. It doesn't allow me to do that in generic select mode. In order to do that, I'd go to either select labels, select coordinates, or select lines. And do that there. So if I want to select that, I can select one label, I can select multiple labels, or I can hold down the control key and draw a little selection box over the labels that I want to select, and I'll select them all there. I do have the select diagrams option there, so just like in Legacy, I can grab that and I can make it, grab that, you can see it turns hot pink, and then I can expand it out to wherever I want it to, or to move it around as I need. Makes it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing, or to manipulate those, have multiple diagrams on different pages. So again, you can see when I hover over the diagram, it turns blue just to indicate that it's a diagram that I can select. So it helps when I get into multiple diagrams on a page, which we'll do a little bit later, then I'll be able to easily determine which one I want to be able to select. Again, if I was just to carry on along here, so I've got the user added options here, so I can add labels and add lines, and that gives me the option to add those. So I'll do just a little bit of manipulation here at the moment. So again, just like Legacy was, you'd be zooming in, I can use the control as I said before, shift and drag to do that zoom box. And then if I wanted to add a label in here, I'm just going to click into here, and if I'm going to add the RT references, just in there, you do have to then select it to change the properties. So again, I can change properties in here using, so go back to that select the label, right click, and then select the properties. And then it gives me options there, obviously, to hide, bold, similar to what was in Legacy, change the fonts if I want to, change the size, and that sort of stuff. So again, I want to make it a little bit smaller, it's a bit too big. I can just accept that. I've got options, other options in that context menu. You can put it back to the original location. I can hide it from here. So if I was to hide it and I've got the view objects turned on, you can see a hidden label will just be shown there as gray. So it is still there. If I'm to hit the visible view hidden objects, it's going to disappear from the display. I do want that to stay there, so I'm going to make it show just to display it on the screen. I have got an option here to rotate the label. So instead of in Legacy, you had the corners of the label where you could rotate. This is just one of the other options, just to be able to rotate it by whole degrees. But obviously, if I want to make it a specific angle, let me cancel that. If I want to, I'd go into properties and I can change the bearing there as well, the rotation of it. And select that, and it will rotate that. I can also align it to label to line. So again, it's one of the functions which is most people find most useful for orientating their labels. Just move that across there. I've got the options there to cut, copy, and delete, or move to a different page. If I do have it selected, I can use the keyboard keys. So I can go Control-C to copy, move my cursor to where I want to paste it, and go Control-V to paste it. I can then just double click on it to give me the option to edit that. So change that option there. If I want to change the sizes of those, go back to the label select, make those a bit smaller again, just to make those a bit not stand out as much, and just move them around. So there's similar manipulation there. The manipulation for coordinates. So sometimes, remember, in Legacy, you could select a line and then you had the option to grab the end point of that line. Instead of that, we've got the select coordinates option here where you can select the coordinate there and move that around as you want. You can right click, move that back to original location, just as it was available in Legacy. Do the same for lines. So if I want to move the whole line around, I can do that. You can see the leader lines showing here where the connected lines are going to appear. And the same functionality back to original location. You notice here I've got properties for those system generated lines or line work. It just shows you what type of line style it is and the width, so it doesn't give you the option to change it. But you can obviously change the ones that are user added, and we'll get to that now. I'm just going to expand it back out, and then I'm going to go to user added lines. So again, I'm just left click each segment or vertices that I want to add, double click to finish that off. I still stays in that add line mode, so I can just add other lines as I want. And then once I'm finished that, I'm going to select click the select lines function, and I can select one at a time. I can select one, hold the control key down and select them, excuse me, or I can hold the control key down and draw a selection box to select them all. And again, I can just move them all as a group. I've got the right context menu here as well, so I can hide them. I've got properties, so I can then change the line style to whatever I want for those as well, and change the width for all of those. So you've got that flexibility as well. Okay, with some of the user-added text, one of the things I wanted to show was just that if I was to zoom in a little bit and just add something like this, you can see if you do have spell check on in your browser, it does actually show up that you've got some spelling errors there that you may want to check. You just right click on the word that's misspelt, and it gives you the option there to change that. If I was to go back and use the properties as well and click into here, it does have that same functionality there as well. So it identifies that there is a spelling mistake there and that I may want to change that and correct it. So I can do that there. So that's really helpful. One of the other things with the user-added text, if I've got the bearing is 30 degrees and I use an illegal character, which is, hold the Alt 248 down to get the degrees symbol, it's going to tell me that I've got an invalid character selected and I can't add that or do anything until I remove that invalid character. So once I delete that character, it allows me to add that text in. And same for labels as well, user-added labels. I've got the properties there where I can change all those fonts for all of them at the same time. So that's a nice, easy way to do that. I'm going to now go to the survey sheets and we'll do some little bits and pieces there because it's going to be easier to show some of the adding a number of diagrams to a page. So again, we've got this the system generated one, which Nick have kindly turned off all the labels for us. So I can see here I've now got the diagram A on, which was the first one, the replacement. I can move it around wherever I want it to. I can then expand it out. And then I can manipulate what I want there. I can add diagram AA, which is the other one in, the child diagram. And you can see as I hover over them, they get the different diagrams will change color to identify which one I'm going to select. So if I click on it, it goes to a sort of purple color to start with, and I move around, it turns to the pink, and I can move that one separately out to the side. So that gives you those options there as well. Once I've been in there, I'm going to start turning off labels and that sort of thing. So as I showed before, you can select multiple labels, holding down Control and left to drag a selection box, and you can hide a lot of those at the same time. So you've got that sort of functionality as well. One of the things I forgot to mention when I was in the title diagram or title sheets was the labels or leader lines, if you call them that, for easement diagrams. So you can see I'm clicking on the label there for the easement, and I want to add a line for that. So I'm just going to add a line fairly close to the, add a user added line, make sure I get the right one. You can see it's kind of that weird line because it's remembered that the last line that I chose was that RT line style. So I'm going to go back into here and change that into properties, change it to the arrow one there, like that. Sometimes it's a bit tricky to determine what the line is or where the line looks. If I move it at quite a distance, you can see those gray arrows just to identify where it's moving to, make it a little bit tricky to line it up. So you get the line relatively close, and then you can see if I'm just moving it a little bit, it doesn't give you those gray arrows. There's a bit of functionality there just to make it easier to manipulate lines and labels at smaller distances. We showed aligning labels to lines before. So again, if I was doing that, I'd be aligning those to the boundaries and then moving into the locations that I wanted to as well. Okay, just checking my list here of things that I wanted to show. So we went through generic select, we added leader lines. So sometimes you've got labels where you want to, where it's not going to fit in. It's not going to fit in the area you want. You can double click on them and add in a carriage return. So similar to legacy, and it puts on a separate line there as well. So again, I've got the functionality to change the alignment of that. So again, make it a bit simpler. So a bit of functionality there as well. Yeah. So Nick, have I missed anything out there? Anything that you thought I should have included?
The only one I mentally noted was jumping to pages from the diagram list and the right-click select stacked labels. Was that?
Yeah, so again, if I was to make this diagram here, chuck it onto another page or multiple pages, chuck that onto a new page here, you can see that it's showing me those pages that it's added it to, so the page number. I can obviously use the page arrows down below to go between, or if I wanted to go straight to one, I've got diagram AA there. If I just click on the number at the end there, it's going to take me straight to that page. Really useful if you've got 50 or 60 pages that you want to try and work through. I can double click on the page as well, or just left click on the page numbers down the bottom there, and it allows me to select which page I want to go to. So again, selecting page takes to my blank page, which I'm going to delete because I don't need that one. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Nick. I'm sure we'll end up with some more things to demo a bit later too. So let's jump back to the presentation for now. Thank you so much for that, Jeremy. Very comprehensive overview of the functionality and layout plan sheets. Okay, so I'm sure some of you have noticed a couple of bits and pieces missing. We had hoped this one would be here today, but we just haven't quite got it over the line yet. So the ability to predefine, oh, sorry, next slide, Ben. I think they're listed there. So the two that we currently have planned that aren't yet there are if you want to style user added text before drawing it or typing it, that should be in shortly in the next week or so at a rough guess. And same for lines. So that'll be a match for the legacy functionality. So hopefully those two aren't too far away for you. Yeah, and as Jeremy demoed in the meantime, it's relatively simple once you get used to it to change it afterwards. But yeah, that will be there soon. What have we got next, Ben? Is that our Q&A section? It is. Okay. So hopefully Jeremy and Lyndon are in a position to turn their microphones on if I rapidly fire questions at them. So we'll just, someone's kindly been putting all the questions in a bit of a list here for me to start working through. So I'll just start working through them and then share the work around between Jeremy, Lyndon, and myself. So first question, is it expected that there are issues and changes when a legacy plan is put into new plan gen? We have multiple plans already completed but will not lodge before 30th September. What amount of rework are we expecting? So our testing has not indicated that plans will need rework when transitioning from legacy to new. I guess I showed you some overlays earlier in the presentation that showed you the extent of the label shift. We haven't had any scenarios looking at real plans that would be required to make a compliant data set yet. It's not to say there aren't any up there. So I'd just encourage you to do a visual check over of the plan in new Landonline and make sure it's in good shape before lodgement. Next question here from Bernie Milne. I might direct this one to Lyndon. Often a high standard error of unit weight for the constrained adjustment relates to issues with the marks that Landonline holds fixed in the adjustment. It's not possible for us to fix this. Is there a plan to provide users more control over the fixed adjustment to avoid the need for LINs to modify existing marks to make the data fit?
Right. Hey, a good question, Bernie. I think what you're focused on there is a system improvement that we ultimately want to make. But at this stage, we're very much focused on finishing the plan generation, rebuilding functionality for our staff, and then we've got to do upgrading our database to ultimately make the system a whole lot more stable and allow us to build the fancy new features that we want in the future. So for the next 18 months, you're not going to see a lot of change in this space here, but hopefully after that, there'll be opportunity to look at suggestions such as what you've said there. So yeah, at this stage, it's a no to that.
Awesome. Thanks, Lyndon. Question from Paula Donald. So that first question around the redrawing was from Alex Harrington. So this question's from Paula Donald. Are there any plans to make the system-generated diagrams editable? Jeremy, do you want to take that one?
So just finding my mute button. So at the moment, we're retaining the same functionality as legacy. So yeah, at this stage, you need to use user-defined diagrams to adjust the extent of the information shown, and you can edit those ones, but no, not at this stage.
Thanks, Jeremy. Question from Patrick Manson. Can maintain diagram options be set as a default so you don't need to set for every plan? So at this stage, everything is set up to work the same as legacy. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong answer. At this stage, to maintain compatibility with legacy Landonline, so we've maintained the same functionality, but does sound like a good suggestion, and I've certainly been requesting that same one too, so I appreciate you raising that. Excellent, and this is in much the same vein, I think. So how about select all and deselect all buttons in the maintain diagrams layers box? And maybe not regenning diagrams not used would speed things up too. Yeah, so I guess thanks for the good suggestions there. At the moment, it's very much around legacy, but as I mentioned, kind of keen to look at improvements like that in the future. So thanks for the suggestions, Russell. It's probably a good one for Jeremy, the next one. So when I was demoing, I created a this one's from Miriam Maguire. When I was demoing, I created a user-defined diagram, which was outside the extents of the system-generated one. If you had created a child diagram, would the adult child labeling have worked? This does not work in legacy.
No, so at the moment it'd be the same as legacy behavior. So a lot of it, because of the backwards and forwards compatibility, a lot of the settings and that are the same as what legacy does. So once legacy is turned off, we'll be able to look at some of those other functionalities and those enhancements.
Thanks. Thanks, Jeremy. Lyndon, another one for you. Are there plans to make the Abutto and Calc line styles available for manually added lines or masking options for mark names, e.g. hiding a calc line so a mark name can be placed over it, then drawing 2 manual lines either side of the mark name? Currently not possible because there is no calc line style available. A mask would be preferable. And that's another one from Paula Donald.
Yeah, hi Paula. Good suggestions. I feel like this is a bit of a cop-out response, but it's the same as our previous responses. Simply, we've had to retain the existing line styles that are available there to maintain that compatibility of legacy Landonline. So there's certainly no plans to add a calc line style, and we'd have to look carefully at that as well. But certainly the Abutto line style, there's not an Abutto line style, but I know you as a workaround, you could use the dashed line style and make it bold. I know some surveyors use that as a workaround. Of course, there's also the option to go back into defined diagrams and add a freehand Abutto line in there. Jeremy, is there anything more you want to add around? I know you're a bit of an expert in adding Abutto lines manually because you just updated the help material this morning. Is there anything else I've missed there?
No, I think you covered it quite well there, Lyndon.
Awesome. Is there any autosave in Capture or Plan Gen? Does Control S work? So in terms, that's another question from Russell Potts. Thanks, Russell. So there is no autosave. Are you in a position to demo that, Jeremy?
Yeah, so I'll steal the share again. I'll just turn that back on, my one. So hopefully you're seeing the same image that I was showing before of the title diagram here in this case. So as I said before, if you don't save your options there, you can't compile plans and that sort of thing. It does have warnings that if I'm going to use the switch mode to go to somewhere else, such as a landing page, it gives me that warning. It's similar if I try and close the browser. So if I close that tab, for example, if I delete that, it gives me a warning message saying that you have got some changes there you haven't saved. Do you want to save them? If I was just to go ahead and go, nah, leave, then obviously I can go back to here because I've got notices open. It saved that. You notice that it closed the browser itself. But if I go back to survey and then obviously to my work page, it'll show that that locked. So you can see it's locked there and doesn't give me the option there to go to plan generation. But if I open survey capture, it gives me an option here it tells me that there is some unsaved changes in layout plan sheets. So this is sort of how the auto recovery works. So I've sort of forced it to do this, but if my browser was to close accidentally or just closed unexpectedly, when I went back into layout plan sheets, as long as I'm using the same computer, then it saves it onto my computer itself. Then it gives me that option there, and I can open up the layout plan sheets, and it will go back to it'll have still have those changes that I've made, so then I can go ahead and save them after that. Gives me the option here, do I want to open those with those changes, recover those unsaved changes? And if I go yes, it recovers those, and I can carry on and save. It hasn't saved yet, but if I save it, I can recover that. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks for the demo, Jeremy. Much easier to understand than hear it described. So that's really good. And the other part of that question was just, does Control S work? So yes, Control S works. I believe all the same Control key shortcuts that worked in Legacy Landonline also work in new. So Control S, Control C, Control V, Control B for bold, delete.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Cool. Another good question from Paula Donald here. Will carriage return be added for mark names? And so it's just in that same bucket of it definitely can't be done while legacy's still going, because we'd also have to make the change in legacy. So that's starting to sound like a broken record, isn't it? But that's where that one's at. Another question here, can you associate user-added text and lines to a diagram so that if you move the diagram, the user-added text and lines will move with the diagram? Jeremy, are you in all right position to do a quick demo of that functionality? I personally didn't actually know this functionality existed in Legacy and was very interested to see it was a thing.
Yeah, so I've got some user-added text that I've added there, or user-added label that I've added there. I'm going to grab the diagram, so select diagram, move that diagram over the other side there. If I right-click, I can get this option here, select text affected by last diagram shift. So I can select that, right-click again, and then apply the last diagram move or resize, and it will move it over to there. Understand
Thanks,
that's what
Jeremy.
the question was asking. Yeah,
that's right. And I believe the same also works for lines, exactly the same process.
that's right. Yes. Yep.
Did you demo the right-click select option when you demoed, Jeremy? Might have been when I glanced away. Do you know what I mean by that? If you've got stacked text and you want to right-click and select a specific piece of text?
Sorry, so you're talking about if I've got stuff over top of each other?
Yeah.
Like this. Then you've got the select option there and the right. So yeah, once I've got that, I just hover over any of those, right click, and I'm getting a select option there, so I can scroll through them and determine which label I want to select and then move that out of the way.
Yeah, super handy when you're working on a busy plan.
Yes. Yep.
Cool, thank you. We've answered that one there. Have the trails back to the original position for moved text disappeared. Good spotting, Blair Ducker. So yes, it has. What's there today is that when you drag the label, when you pick a label, the coordinate goes pink. And same with lines. If you grab a bearing or a distance, the line goes pink. But those leader lines back to the original positions should be back shortly. They're not too far away. They're working in the demo environment now, so it should be out in the next couple of days. And it's particularly handy for parcels when you're trying to figure out which appellation a parcel related back to. There was talk early in the piece about possibly having portrait plans or allowing north arrows to be rotated. Is this something that is still being considered or developed? I don't know who asked the question, sorry, but there are no plans to replace, to support portrait plans at this point in time. So that would be in that bucket of future improvements if they get priority post the rest of the migration from Legacy Landonline. Another cool suggestion here. How about using arrow keys to move things, especially for small movements? I can see the value in that. Like the idea. Thank you for that suggestion. A good clarifying question here from Vaughan Redshaw. So does approval prior to 30th September mean lodge for approval or actual approval? Thanks for the question, Vaughan. Lyndon, did you want to take that one?
Sure, Nick. Hey, yeah, Vaughan, good question. We were very deliberate in our wording there, and it does mean that the plans will need to be approved as the survey, not lodged. Given the processing times, that effectively means to be safe and sure, you're effectively looking at a lodge date at the end of August to be safe. Now, if you're not going to get a requisition, you're safe, but we know about 50% of data sets will get a requisition, and if you get a requisition and you have to go back into plan generation, you run the risk of things moving. So if you'd need to then do the visual check on every page. So that's why we encourage you now to make the shift as soon as possible. I can see a few gasps showing up on the screen there when I said that there, but we've got a very short transition window here, and it's best to make the leap sooner rather than later. That's our advice.
Thanks, Lyndon. Next question here. Has any consideration been given to having separate default settings for parcel appellations and easement appellations, i.e. setting different font sizes? It's a very good suggestion. I have wondered the same thing myself at times. But yeah, that's certainly not in the immediate future. It's a down the line potential improvement topic. So sorry to regurgitate the same answer over and over again. Keep trying to say it in different ways, but it doesn't make it any better, does it? Double clicking items. Jeremy, I wondered if you might be able to display this maybe on some appellations around adding extra lines in and things like that. So can you double click items, text and lines, etc. to bring up properties? Can you show what we do and don't have?
Okay, so with the user-edited label, if I double click, it just opens up the editable box, so I can edit the text, the label itself. On a line, if I, oops, sorry, I need to have the line selected. No, it doesn't, there's no double click to do that. You just right click. So I can just move across to a line and right click and brings up the properties, but no, at the moment, there's no double click to edit or bring up the properties.
But on user-edited text, it can be used for certain text, right?
Sorry, yes, for user-edited labels, yes, it can.
And also for appellations to add in carriage
returns, that's right. Yep.
So that's what we do and don't have in terms of the double-click functionality. Question, is there a fix for system-generated diagram labels disappearing? Sometimes we need to manually add them as user-edited text and leaves room for human error with sheet references. We believe this problem will still exist in the new because we believe it's part of the, I guess, the functionality that Legacy was relying on is doing it. I guess a fix could be using user-edited diagrams and trying to avoid using the system-generated ones, but it's probably not really what you meant, is it? So yeah, that issue can still eventuate. I think there are workarounds for it. And yeah, but if it was happening to you, I'd encourage you to pull the full center for that one. Next question, if you move a diagram as a functionality moves user-edited text and lines the same amount as the diagram. Oh, yep, so we just had that demonstrated by Jeremy. He did just demonstrate the text, but it works the same for lines as well. Yeah. And I guess if it doesn't work for moving between pages as a comment, but what you can do is just highlight the text and right click and go move to page, and then highlight the lines and go move to page. So if you moved a diagram to a new page, you could do the you could move the text and lines to a new page. This just with a slightly different process. Oh, here I see Jeremy's demonstrating the reply last shift.
Yeah, if I could do it properly. But yes, you can. You get the options there to select text and select lines. And when you select those, you get the lines to select. And you can apply the last move or resize.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. I've lost track of where I am on my list, sorry. Bear with me for a moment. Does plan gen auto close if active for a certain period as per Legacy? I'll take that one. So yes, it does. So yeah, if you're inactive for 15 minutes, well, I think it's at 13 minutes, that pop-up window pops up and says, in 2 minutes it'll close. So yeah, I guess the existing practices around encouraging you to do Control S before you walk away from your computer and lock your screen, things when you walk away, are still there as per Legacy. I believe the auto recovery does work in that scenario, in the sense that if you did get locked out and you had unsaved changes, if you refresh your browser when you can next get into the system, I believe your changes are still there. However, it's been so long since I've tested it, I'm slightly nervous that it doesn't. But yeah, I guess the generic recommendation is make sure you save before you stop working on your plan. Okay. In Legacy, when adding new text and lines, you can select the line immediately without using the select button. In the new version, you had to change to the select tool to select the new text. Will this feature return? That was a query from Glenn Capel. I'm guessing he's a pilot user, because I would have been very eagle-eyed to spot that in the demo. Yeah, Lyndon, did you want to take that one?
Sure. I just took myself off mute. So I just want to make sure I understand the question properly. You can select the line immediately without using the
So it's after you've, say, drawn a line in Legacy, it would jump over to line select mode for you. Or if you've written some text, then when you finish writing it, legacy would jump over to select text mode for you, whereas the new app leaves it on the line drawing tool or the text writing tool. So it's going, can you automatically jump over to the select option for us after making those edits?
But I believe for the line option, it does stay on the line. So if you add a line, is what you're talking about. Add a line, it stays on the line functionality. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
With
So
the
the
user,
request is
with the label, it's different. So I'm just chucking in a label here, and then when I click out, it changes to generic select. So for the label, it's different at the moment than what the line's doing. So yeah, Lyndon, did you?
No, thank you for jumping to my rescue there, Jeremy. Yeah.
So as mentioned earlier, yeah, if there are things that you'd like to see in here or have other questions later on, feel free to ask them later on, but you can use the feedback buttons there to provide feedback on the application.
Oh, yeah, and I guess that's a good thing to mention. So same story applies. If you have an immediate issue with the application and you're blocked, please call the 0800 number. Those feedback forms get reviewed. It'll probably be daily for the first few weeks of everyone being an open release, but after that it's weekly. It's not the place to get immediate help with your plan. But yeah, if you have an idea or you just want to report something that's happened, then and you've managed to move on and it's not blocking your work, that light bulb option in the top right is the right one. But yeah, still use the 0800 number for issues that are affecting your ability to work. Right, where am I up to? When I look away from my screen for too long, I find it hard to find where I was on my list. Does the same apply to stacked line selections as worked for stacked text selection? I don't believe.
No, I was just trying to do that now, and no, it doesn't apply to lines. It says only for labels at this stage.
Is hide 00 still an option? You probably got one you can demo there, Jeremy.
Yes, of course. Yep. So if I grab one down here, so yes, I can go to properties and I can hide the 00. So you can do that for multiple labels, obviously, if you select all the labels. Oops, sorry, I've got to use the control instead. So if I select those, it gives me the property. Oh, crikey, user error. Properties, hide those. So you can see it had one hidden, so it showed me a dash instead. So I just double clicked in there and it had the zeros for all the ones that had 0 seconds.
Next question is around aligning multiple labels to a line. Have we fixed that yet, Jeremy? I thought that had been fixed. Is it? Any plans to align multiple labels to a line or allowing double line text for appellations that will automatically add the second line after the lot? Oh, there's two questions there. So any plan to align multiple labels to a line, allow it?
No, it doesn't do that at the moment.
Okay. Cool. So those are improvement ideas, and those are great examples of things. If they're, if you think of them and they're impacting you, and you think that'd be a good improvement, then do just log those ones through the feedback. Yeah. So the other one raised there was, can you automatically add a second line after the lot number and before the DP number for all the underlying appellations? I can see how that would be pretty handy on some plans. So thanks for the suggestion, Stuart. Okay, hi. Any chance you could add functionality for shortcut keys to your to-do list, i.e. P to bring up properties for a selected line, or shortcuts to change line selection type? It would make it a lot more similar to normal CAD programs. Yeah, so I guess at this stage, there aren't any immediate plans for more shortcut shortcut keys. And yeah, I guess thanks for the suggestion, and yeah, encourage people to keep putting these suggestions through. There is definitely an ongoing budget for these kind of smaller kind of improvements. So when we say, it could be 2 years before these things happen, it's likely that for the first few months that it'll be addressing, any little issues that pop up. But then after that, there is, a budget there for improvements to these things as we go. So do use that feedback for these kind of cool little improvement suggestions. I'm just looking at the time. We're due to wrap up at 1:15, so I'll go for a minute or two more. Then we've just got a tiny bit more to run through in the pack before wrapping up at 1:15. So I won't get through every question by the looks of it. They keep appearing as I'm answering them. So I think what we'll do is undertake to write down answers to each of these questions and then circulate them later. Okay, could commonly used user added? Oh, what have I've missed a step. Are the improvements going to be notified as they are for capture? So yes, we can add what we call them a splash screen. Those screens that pop up when you first open capture. And they also get listed on the What's New page. So when we release improvements, they get listed. Particularly the major ones, we use the splash screen for that it pops up in capture, and then the What's New page is a bit more detailed and goes through kind of smaller improvements. We also go through and remove things from known issues pages when they're fixed as well. With next question, with the ending of legacy, will there be a move to enabling color diagrams to be included as part of a data set, either in plans or within supporting documents, e.g. occupation diagrams in color, backed by an aerial photo as an example? Lyndon or Jeremy, did either of you feel like taking that one?
Why don't I have a go? Warren, good suggestions, Warren. I think one of the things we probably need to be clear on as we've headed into down this process of replacing legacy plan generation is that this the longer term direction that LINS wants to go here is to replace plan generation with digital visualization, and we obviously ran that consultation last year. The Surveyor General's responded to that consultation feedback and confirmed that's the direction we want to head. So plan generation is very much for lack of better words, I could use the word stopgap measure. We are focused on replacing what we've got now to allow you to prepare compliant data sets. So it's certainly in the future, absolutely colour is the way to go, but we would be looking at different platforms to deliver that. Possibly digital visualised survey plans would be the answer to look at other options to include colour again, but there wouldn't be an intention to include colour in plan generation functionality as it is today.
Awesome, thanks, Lyndon. I'm going to have to wrap up the question section now, just because we've only got a couple of minutes to go. It's funny when you plan these webinars, you always sit there going, have we allowed enough time for questions? And we made it pretty long today, and we still managed to run short. So apologies about that, but as I mentioned, we'll circulate answers to those. So in terms of what's next, at some stage later today, when you log into Survey Capture, or if you log into Survey Capture, there'll be a pop-up screen or a splash screen that will say new plan generation is live. You may also notice before that when you choose to try open your survey from the My Work page, you'll get to either choose Survey Capture or plan generation. So at that point, you will have access to the new plan generation application. So yeah, I would encourage you to jump in there and use it and get familiar with it. The help content, I'll just reiterate, is available via the question marks, and it jumps to the right part of the help for you if you choose it from where you've experienced the issue or where you want help from. There's that know an issue page, which is the bug symbol. So if you're experiencing an issue and you're going, what's going on, can be worth checking there. Feedback via the in-app form, but if you need help, kind of now you're working on it, then call the 0800 number. And yeah, I guess generally we encourage you to use the new Plan Gen wherever possible. And yeah, the webinar recording will be sent out next week, and there will be some written up answers to the questions that we haven't managed to get to included with that email. So yeah, thanks everyone for attending, and yeah, I hope it's been helpful and you feel like you have the information you need to jump in and use the new plan generation. Thanks everyone for your time.